Hey guys, it's Tony, and we're back on the bench. And this evening, we are going to get into doing some reassembly servicing here on a small spinning reel. It belongs to my friend Dan. So we're looking at a Rapala model. This is a Rap I-20 made by Rapala. This is essentially a combo reel, but we've been working on cleaning it up here a little bit and just trying to get it ready to, get used again. I think he told me he hasn't used this in quite a while. And so, we've been working on, just kind of doing the basics on it, taking these Q-tips and just cleaning out all the old grease and dirt and stuff like that here. You can see we've got this brass bushing that we want to clean up here. So, we've cleaned out, the whole housing here. We're going through all these parts here. This does have a line roller bearing in it, and all these bearings, as you can see, these little rollers down here, they all fell out. All right, so we're going to, we're going to go back in step here, essentially, and we're going to, get this reel ready to do some fishing here. So, what I normally would do is I'll apply some blue grease here to the pinion gear, but what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to wait until it's actually installed, just so I don't get grease completely all over me here. But one thing that has to happen, though, speaking of grease, is we need to get those line rollers set back in this plastic housing here. Okay, and one way that this can be achieved here is by putting, taking all these pieces out, cleaning them, thoroughly. So this is our roller here, and as you can see, it actually does have some rust damage on it, and this is what happens over time, when reels aren't used. Okay, but this essentially will go through the shaft like so. All right, and then you've got this carriage here that those line rollers rest on. All right, now typically I would not load up a lot of grease. I would apply a little bit of oil. In this case, I am going to do some grease, and so I'm going to take this Penn Precision Blue Grease here, just because these line rollers here are, they all the bearings just basically fall out, once you start, putting them in and you start turning this thing around. And so we're going to put some grease in here, and that's going to hold those bearings in place while we work on this here. Okay, so that we can get our shield back in there. And that's going to keep these lubed, of course, over time. All right, so you can see we've got these tiny, tiny little line rollers here, or roller bearings, I should say. And we got to get those back in place, and they got to stay there essentially in order for this to work right. But this helps ensure a smooth operation of the reel, and it is an essential part of it, so that's the way it's designed. So we want to make sure that all these go in real nicely, and hopefully that grease will do its job and keep these in place while we get the shield that goes over it. Okay, so it should look something like that right there, and then we're going to put this over the top like so to cover those. Okay, so that you have something that looks like that. Okay, and then we're going to rest this back down into position here slowly. Okay, and it should look something like that. Okay, now we're going to hold this in place, of course. There is a shim washer here, and you don't want to forget that. Okay, thin little shim washer. Sometimes you need the help of a little screwdriver or tool to kind of press this down with here, because they're just really, really thin. Okay. Okay. Okay, now we're ready to take our blue grease to our pinion gear. And you can just kind of spin it ever so slightly. Get some of that blue grease in those gear teeth. Don't need to hit every single one, but you want to get some in there. Okay. Now, I want to get a little bit of real oil here. Then you just kind of want to inspect all this before we continue and make sure that all these pieces are lined up and synced up, so to speak. All right, and then we've got our carriage here that has to go back on. And that's going to lock in on top of the plastic carriage that holds the bearings. Okay, and it should look something like that. Okay, we've cleaned up all these other parts here. We've got this flange that has to go back on. We did struggle a little bit taking this stuff out. Actually had to reattach the rotor so that we could get these pieces back together. So we got our ball bearing here. We've cleaned this up with some WD-40, and we're going to go back with some real oil. Put that back into place, like so. Okay. And then we've got a brass washer that rests on top of that. Okay, then comes these pieces here. And it's probably best before you start attaching screws to get your spring attached, okay? And this is the world's tiniest little spring, but you have to be able to get this attached first. And it's not the easiest of tasks. See if we can do it with this tool here. It comes off pretty easy. Putting it back can be a little bit more of a chore sometimes. Okay, so we got our spring in place there. Okay, we've got screws in the top, so that's all good to go now. Okay, so now we've cleaned up our main gear and all these parts here. We've got our main gear shaft and our crosswind gear and block, all these pieces cleaned up the best that we can. We're going to go in with some blue grease on the surface in here, like so. Then we're going to take some to underneath the crosswind gear as well as the teeth, and on the top a little bit here. Just let that grease work its way in there. We're going to set that down like so. Take the block, a little bit of grease underneath in that slot there. Going to rest that in place. Also, we're going to get a little bit here as well. Sometimes you gotta move the gear around just a little bit to get it to line up just right. Okay. And then we're gonna go back. Make note that there's usually one or two, in this case it's two thin shim washers there. You don't want to lose those, but we've cleaned up these surfaces the best that we can. We're gonna take our blue grease to these gear teeth and shaft here. And that's all gonna work its way in there. All these teeth. Okay. And then at this point, there's a couple of things that we need to do here, because remember, you have to have the rotor on and the main shaft in place, okay, kind of all at the same time, but the rotor has to be loose enough in order to get your plate back on, okay? So before we go further, we're going to inspect this. We're just going to make sure that this is free of any dirt or extra sand or anything like that. It's pretty dirty here on the sides. So what we'll probably do is we're just going to hose it down with a little bit of WD-40. Just clean up any of that stuff that we can. Take a Q-tip, just kind of run it along the insides here. Just clean that up the best we can. Okay, and before we put this on, we're going to do a little bit of real oil here, as well as the seams of the bail here. Let that oil get in there and work its way in there. Yeah, it's a lot better now already, I can tell. Okay. And then what we'll do in turn is I'm going to place this back over the top of the pinion shaft gently. Okay, but we're going to leave it loose. And then we've got our main shaft here. We've cleaned it up with some 4-0 steel wool. And we're going to go in with our blue grease here, like so. And we're going to start this. But we're not going to put it all the way through yet, because we got to get our main gear into position and mesh up with the crosswind block and the pinion gear. You should be able to press down and get that started, and then you can push through with your main shaft and get your holes lined up down here at the base. Okay, little bead of oil there. And you should be able to put in your set screw here. Turn out that that is not the right screw. It happens to be right here. So that's a lesson right there. If it starts to feel tight, back it off right away, because you don't want to go cross-threading stuff, and then you're in for a whole nother project. Okay. We're going to do some blue grease here as well. All right, and then we've got our brass bushing here. I'm going to slap that back in place like so. Okay. Now, what we want to do here is we want to get this plate back on, okay, before we tighten the rotor. Okay, so that little snap is usually a good sign. We've hosed these screws down with a little bit of WD-40, so that's going to help protect the life of the threads. Okay. I'm pretty sure this screw went down here at the base. It's the cleanest screw we have here, so that would make sense that it's protected under the protective cap. Okay. Okay, now we can tighten up our rotor, that reverse threaded nut, and it's an 11 millimeter. And we just want to spin that up. We don't want to over tighten it, but we do need it to be snug. Okay, and then we've got our set screw here. It's going to hold that in place so that it doesn't back out on us. Like that. Okay, and then we've got our clicker ratchet, and then these two spacer washers that go on top, like so. Okay, and then we've got our cap that we can put back into place here, like so. And we'll do just a little bead of oil on that screw thread there, just to help protect that, because it's usually these screws here at the base that take the most abuse from the dirt and the salt and sand and things of that sort. So now we're going to have a look at this drag stack. Okay, we've cleaned up our spool. All right, it's in pretty good shape. We're going to do a little bead of oil here. Okay, and then we have our stack here. It's going to go back. These are felt washers and metal washers. And all you really need to do with these felt washers is just give them a light little bead of oil. That's all you really need to do there. Okay. Simple. Go back. The felt washer, metal washer, next felt washer, keyed washer, felt, and metal. And then we've got this C-ring here to hold that in place. Sometimes these are a little bit of a headache. Just got to work at it. Okay, it should look like that. And we're going to slap that back into place like that. There we go. And we're going to tighten this up a little bit. Looks like that's working pretty good. All right, and then for here, all we got to do is just a little bit of cleaning, a little bit of WD-40. Let that work its way in there. We'll do a little bit of real oil here, and also on the knob. Prevent any chatter. And we'll go in with a little bit of grease here. A little bit of real oil on these threads. And we're going to see if this reel is going to be ready to do some fishing. Okay, so we're going to give this a shot. Spins a lot better now than it did. It doesn't have that sluggish feel to it anymore, as it shouldn't. Make sure the bail fire is good. Drag is nice and tight. Holding as you tighten that up, nice and smooth. Back that off when you're not using the reel. Don't forget. The anti-reverse is working good. So there you have it. That is the Rapala I-20 spinning reel, all serviced up and ready to go. And thanks again for watching. This is Tony with Back on the Bench. If you liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please make sure you do subscribe and hit the notification button. That way you will get all the updates as to when there are new videos being posted, and there'll be quite a few more coming out shortly, so stay tuned for those, and we'll see you next time.